it's another day to do business, but today is not just any other day. It's the day after Nigeria got the rebased GDP, the number we've been waiting for like forever. So, of course, conversations will dwell on it today, and we'll see those numbers, the impact, and what to expect in the future following the rebased GDP released by the NBS. Good morning, everyone. I guess I got too excited about those rebased numbers after waiting for it for so long. I'm Uni John Marquardt. This is 55 minutes of current and relevant business talks. It's business morning, but we'll still start from the global space where oil prices edged down on Tuesday as concerns that the brewing trade war between major crude consumers, that's the United States and the European Union, will curb fuel demand growth by lowering economic activity. That has weighed on investor sentiment, and so we see Brent's futures fell, lost 24 cents. That's about 0.35% to head at $68.97 a barrel after settling 0.1% lower on Monday. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude was at $66.99 a barrel, lost 21 cents, that's about 0.31%, following a 0.2 loss in the previous session. The August WTI contract expires today, and the more active September contract lost 23 cents, that's about 0.35%, to $65.72 a barrel. Still, the oil market has struggled to find any direction since the ceasefire on June 24, ending the conflict between Israel and Iran. That removed concerns about major supply disruptions in the key Middle East producing regions. Since then, Brent has traded in a range of $5.19 and WTI in a range of $5.65 as supply concerns have been alleviated by major producers. Raising outputs and investors are increasingly worried about the global economy amid U.S. trade policy changes. However, a weaker U.S. dollar has provided some backing for crude as buyers are using other currencies and paying relatively less. We're still in the oil and gas space. The Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited says it has generated a total revenue of 4.571 trillion naira in June 2025, sustaining its upward earnings momentum as crude oil and gas production recorded notable increases, and that's according to latest data from the National Oil Company. This is part of the NNPCL's monthly report summary for June, and it showed a steady rebound in upstream activities, with daily crude oil and condensate production rising to 1.6 million barrels per day. That's the highest since January. The report also shows a robust performance in gas output, with natural gas production hitting 7.581 billion standard cubic feet every day in the month of June. That's up from 7.35 in May and 6.61 in February, indicating a sustained recovery in Nigeria's gas sector. Good news coming from there. Breakdown of key metrics also shows that NNPCL posted 905 billion naira in profit after tax for the period, while cumulative statutory payments to the Federation from January to May stood at 6.961 trillion, reinforcing the firm's critical role in national revenue generation. Well, we're glad to see that gas production there is increasing, and we do hope it's sustained. We've been talking a whole lot about what Nigeria is losing in not exploring enough of the potentials in gas, and gas flaring, of course, hit some record highs in losses. Now, Nigeria's gross domestic product grew 3.13% year-on-year in real terms in the first quarter of 2025. This is according to the latest report by the National Bureau of Statistics. Addressing a news conference in Abuja, the Statistician General of the Federation, Prince Adeyemi Adeniro, explains that the figure represents an improvement of 2.27% growth recorded in the corresponding period of 2024. He also adds that the first quarter of this year shows that economic performance was driven mainly by the services and industry sectors.
After what is described by the National Bureau of Statistics as a rigorous exercise, the top management of the Bureau are making key findings on the rebased gross domestic product. The rebased GDP, according to the statistics body, reflects changes in the nation's economy over a period of time.
Economies are dynamic. They change continually with innovation, with new technologies, which alter the production and consumption pattern of individuals, of households, of firms, and also of government. Given these changes, it is only right that the parameters that we use to estimate the size, the structure, and movement in the economy are updated periodically.
The Statistician General explains that the nation's gross domestic product grew by 3.1% year-on-year in real terms in the first quarter of 2025. This growth rate is higher than the 2.3% recorded in the first quarter of 2024. Also, the statistical agency adds that the rebased statistics as at 2019 stood at 205 trillion naira, driven by crop production, trade, real estate, telecommunications, and the oil and gas sector.
The performance of the GDP in Q1 of 2025 was driven mainly by the service sector, which recorded a growth rate of 4.33% and contributed 57.5% to the aggregate GDP. The agriculture sector grew by 0.07% during the reference quarter, that's Q1, from the minus 1.79% recorded in the first quarter of 2024. The growth of the industry sector was 3.42% from 2.35% recorded in the first quarter of 2024.
The figure for the rebased gross domestic product is out. The National Bureau of Statistics expects that the figures will help guide business owners, Nigerians, and government at all levels in economic planning and reforms. Sarah Chimogu, Channels Television News.
Been a long time coming, but finally we got those numbers yesterday. The rebased GDP showing that Nigeria's economy grew 3.13% in the first quarter of 2025. Now let's look at some of those details a bit more. Estimates from Q1, we'll just stay on Q1, even though the base year is now 2019. That's what the NBS chose as the base year, and that's where the calculation is coming from. But let's just stay on the first quarter of this year. So we see the GDP estimate for the first quarter. Total GDP amounted to about 94 trillion naira, and that's what they told us. Agriculture did about 18, crop production, livestock, forestry, fishing, mining and quarry contributed to that. Those are the ones you're seeing right there, the major ones. And we had there in that report where Sarah, my colleague, who covered the event, noted that the Statistician General said services, and we can see there, if the total is 94 trillion, about 94 trillion, and we see services contributing 57.9 trillion, almost 58 trillion. So I guess eyes on services now, which seems to be a good and a new development. Countries like the UK, they live on services. You know, so when we talk about diversifying the economy, I guess, are we moving closer to that? We could ask that question. Well, thank God that we do have economists joining us in the house to help us unpack some of this. But before I bring in, so the key observation there says services dominated the GDP contribution. We already said 57.5, followed by agriculture. We see the agriculture 23.33%. Industries then follows 19.18%. Real GDP growth slowed, however, compared to same time last year, which was at 3.38. We see it's 3.1 now. Non-oil sectors, however, grew faster than oil sectors. We saw that non-oil sector grew by 3.19%, while oil grew at 1.87%. So let's unpack this now with the Chief Executive Officer of Financial Derivatives Company, Mr. Bismarck Rewane. Mr. Rewane, good to have you on the program on a day like this, because I know you help us understand a whole lot of things beyond the numbers. So finally, we got the numbers, and we see services leading. Is this new for us?
No, good morning. Thank you for having me. And this is a major development as far as economics is concerned in Nigeria. Rebasing using 2019 as a base year compared to the past actually reflects, it's a better and a more current reflection of what the economic situation is today. Like the Statistician General said, it changes consumer preferences, investor preferences, and manufacturing preferences. Now, what does this mean? It means that today, let's talk about it in dollar terms. It's better rather than talk about naira, because when you compare economies with a unit of account which is comparable to other countries. Today, Nigeria's economy, roughly speaking, approximately $250 billion. It used to be about $187 billion. So there's been a jump of about 31%. Nigeria is now the 40th largest, that is number 40 in the global ranking of economies. Nigeria is the fourth largest economy in Africa. The largest economy in Africa being South Africa, $400 billion. Egypt, $389 billion. Algeria, $263, and Nigeria is about $250 billion. Tells you something. One, the most important thing here is that the income per head in Nigeria, we have to compare with sub-Saharan Africa. We leave the North African countries away from there. Nigeria's income per head is about $1,000 per head. That is, if you take it averagely, while in South Africa, it's $5,709 per head. It means that we are lagging. If you look at market capitalization of our exchange, it's about $54 billion, right? And you will see that South Africa's market cap is about $1.16 trillion. Unemployment, whichever measure you want to use, in South Africa is about 32%. In Nigeria, it is said to be 4.84%, depending on how you define unemployment. Our income, our fiscal deficit per head, as a percent of GDP, is about 3.47%, while in South Africa is about 4.7%. One important variable, where you come back to talk about services and non-services and agriculture and industry in a minute. One important variable is that you cannot grow an economy of this size without power. The power generated per head in Nigeria is 180 kilowatts per head. Maybe you can light 1 or 2 bulbs with that. In South Africa, power output per head is about 3,000 kilowatts per head. So you can imagine what that tells you a lot. So you've got to do something about power. Now, one thing you must bear in mind is that the president has said repeatedly, his aspiration is to make this economy become a $1 trillion economy by the year 2030. Okay? If you are to do that from $250 billion, to do that in 5 years, it means that the economy has to grow at 15%, but you are growing at 3%. So I would like us to understand the difference between leaping and limping. What I said last time on your program, which was misquoted, was that the economy will be limping its way into recovery, not leaping. Leaping means quantum leap. Limping means you are growing in small steps. Growth. So we need growth in the power sector. We need growth in refining capacity and everything that the Dangote Group is doing, midstream, upstream, downstream, and agricultural sector. But what is important to note is that the service sector that you're talking about, which is growing, does not employ that many people. The sectors that employ people most are construction, real estate, agriculture, manufacturing, and those are the sectors that we need to emphasize. So one, this recalibration of our GDP focuses and brings our mind to realize that one, we are not a rich country. We are a country with a lot of potential, like we said, but that's an overlabored phrase. But we are a country that can become rich if only would work. And we have to make that transition from being a produced wealth, from being a natural wealth economy to becoming a natural wealth plus a produced wealth economy. That is very important to note at this time.
Okay, Mr. Rewane, let's talk more about going from limping to leaping. And we've seen that the services sector is a major driver of these numbers that we see here. You say we need to do about 15%. I mean, that's so far off. But at least let's try and see. So when we look at that services sector, we see trade contributed, I think, the second largest. The largest is actually real estate, about 16 trillion. And then we have trade, almost 15 trillion. We have construction, about 5. ICT, which was our new oil. I think the last time we talked about GDP elaborately was ICT. Now, ICT is added about 7 trillion. So if we want to move from this limping to leaping, I guess these are the sectors we should be looking at. But from what perspective? From the private sector, from policy, from funding, how do we move from limping to leaping?
No, it's not a binary choice. It is, you have to do it, you have to complement one another. You need the services, you need the ICT, because those are things that drive productivity, makes markets more efficient, and it reduces the amount of exploitation of people by price gouging, right? But you see, the ICT sector is also power dependent. So you have to make a major decision, strategic decision about how you want to deal with power. So having said that, we must be clear in our mind that Nigeria is still an oil producing, more of a gas producing country. So we need to nurture, we need to groom that goose that will lay the golden eggs. And that's why there's a major decision by the government to invest and reinvigorate the oil sector. So not just oil, gas, the pipelines, refining, and actually begin to export refined products rather than just export crude oil. So that tells you something. But GDP is an output measure, not an income measure. And therefore, you will continue to grow the output. You continue to, and you have to ensure that not only is the output growing, and aggressively for that matter, which you can call leaping, right? But the distribution of the income, right, must be such that even this $1,000 must be equitable and fair. We have a very high income inequality. We also have opportunity inequality. We have insecurity. Those are things that even if you grew by 30%, if you don't deal with those issues, there will be resentment in the society, and you would have crisis. So one is that economic growth is not just about output measures, but it is also about happiness and welfare. So you don't want to have happy statistics and unhappy people.
Unhappy Nigerians. Well, Mr. Rewane,
right, so,
don't the numbers now suggest that real estate has overtaken oil in output?
Yes, you can say that. I mean, in terms of contribution, it depends on how you measure it. But real estate will not generate dollars for you. Oil and gas will generate dollars. So at the end of the day, you need a currency, you need to earn foreign currency to defend your own domestic currency, to add values. And real estate is cyclical. In other words, is that during boom times, real estate values increase, but during times of downturns, the real estate values actually decline sharply. So it is one of those sectors, because of the housing deficit you have and all of that, that can drive growth, but it's not the only sector. It's necessary to have a real estate sector that is booming, but it's not sufficient. You need a combination of all of these factors, the ones that employ people, the ones that house people, the ones that generate logistics and better roads, better ports. So it's a whole cocktail of things that you require to achieve for people. Standard of living has improved. What is happening today is that the standard of living of Nigerians today is much worse than it was maybe 15 years ago. So you foundation for growth, but you now have to ensure that that growth is sustainable it's inclusive, and also that the dividends of this growth is distributed in such a way that no particular section of the country, no group in the country, no area in the country, no region in the country is left behind. That's important.
But do the data tell us that our journey into diversifying the economy has started?
Yes, it tells you that that started. First and foremost, we were, in 2010, there was nothing like ICT. There was very limited contribution. Now it's been growing faster than any other sector. Financial services is growing. Creative art and entertainment is growing. Also, agriculture is growing in the sense that you now have aquaculture, you have crop production, you have primary produce, and you have other things. So it's a combination of factors. But one thing that I must point out is that the exchange rate liberalization and alignment of the currency to its fair value has helped to make the economy more resilient. In other words, people are now investing in those sectors for import substitution, not because it was forced on us, because it has become lucrative to invest in the domestic medical investment, the domestic education, because it's just too expensive to go out and do it. And that has enhanced and produced a lot of things. One other factor that you have not mentioned and we have not discussed is the contribution of the informal sector. The informal sector is now supposedly at about 42% of total GDP. So we are capturing activities, because GDP is an estimate of output. And you have three ways of measuring GDP. You have the output approach, you have the expenditure approach, and you have the income approach. When you take all of this together, you must bear in mind that if the GDP is growing and money supply is not growing that rapidly, then you begin to see inflation begin to taper. And so when you look at inflation in Nigeria, some people think it's because there's too much money. No, that is part of it. But it's because there's too little output. And that is the most important thing. So how is output going to be growing, and where is it going to be coming from? So all of these things point to the fact that there's an economy that is gradually, slowly, and limping out of its doldrums. And you'll begin to see this as we go along in the price levels. And luckily, the NPC is meeting today, and I'm sure the 11 wise men will come up with some decisions.
They'll come up with a wise decision.
Yes.
Thank
But
you
like
so
they
much.
say, we never know. It's never over until the part lady sings.
Until it's over, until we hear the announcement. But thank you so much, Chief Executive Officer of Financial Derivatives Company, Mr. Bismarck Rewane. Certainly, we cannot dissect all of the GDP sectors and numbers today. We'll certainly stay on it. But thank you so much for sharing your views with us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Let's take a break. When we come back, another important conversation, the tax reform. And we have, the man at the helm of the affairs there to tell us what to expect in the coming days and months as we count down to January 2026. That's after the break. Please stay with us. Welcome back. It's still Business Morning right here on Channels Television. We're discussing tax now. Mr. Taiwo Yedele had a lot of sleepless nights, but I think he's sleeping a bit more now. He said his wife had to keep vigil for him every day. I think that has also reduced, because he's been successful. We now have a law, a new tax law. Implication begins next year, January. So let's see what to expect, or the road to that operationalization of the new tax law in Nigeria. First of all, let's refresh our memories of some of the high points of the new tax that will be implemented in Nigeria from January 2026. So we see there will be increased exemption threshold for small companies. This has been making the rounds now. It's been celebrated. Companies are now exempt from company income tax, capital gain tax, newly introduced development levy. Small businesses are defined as companies with annual gross turnover of about 100 million. Previously, it was about 25. So that's for small businesses. They've been celebrating that. Increased capital gain tax, that's the NTA increases capital gains from 10 to 30 for companies, 30%. And this effectively aligns with the CGT and companies income tax. For individuals, capital gains will be taxed at the applicable income tax rate based on progressive tax band. There's the introduction of that development levy. We know that's brought a bit of controversy because of, those other, the information technology levy, the higher institution one. So I believe that takes care of it. There's the control foreign company rules. This is supposed to bring extra revenue to the government for those foreign companies operating in Nigeria. There's the introduction of economic development incentive. This act replaces the pioneer tax holiday incentive with an economic development incentive, and this incentive introduces a tax credit of 5% per annum for 5 years. There's the VAT at 0 rate on essential goods and services. I know you would really, really want to know more about this as it concerns you, even though Mr. Oyedele has been on different platforms talking about it. There's also the VAT fiscalization rules. Nigeria now has codified VAT fiscalization rules and mandatory e-invoicing, talking about transparency. There's updates on VAT sharing. That also brought a lot of controversy, but all of that has been laid to rest. So let's try and use the time we have as much as possible to understand what to expect. With the Chairman, Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele. Mr. Oyedele, good morning and good to have you on the program.
Good morning, Ini. Thank you for having me.
Great. So I think the one you have talked about most is the one on small businesses, and then the e-invoicing. But maybe you should give us those highlights, of the most interesting ones. You've been talking about it. Let's just put it together before we delve into those other nitty-gritties part of it.
Yeah, I think you did a very good job with your highlights in terms of some of the major changes in the new tax system. But I think maybe we need to highlight that low-income earners, which we were able to arrive at using data about household income, about the employment rates in Nigeria, and then the average size of a family to arrive at the number, which depending on the level of statutory contributions and deductions you have in your salary payment, around 120,000 naira per month or less, you will see your PAYE down to 0. So that allows you more disposable income to meet your basic needs. And if you are in the middle class is relative. So this is based on the number of people who earn those amounts of money in Nigeria and who are able to meet their basic need and have something left. So that we put in the region of between 120,000 a month up to about 2 million naira a month. They will see a reduction in their PAYE, personal income tax bill. Again, they will have more disposable income to cater for their needs. And if you earn above that 2 million naira per month, you see slight increases. This slight means it could be as little as 100 naira a month that you pay more. But of course, if you earn a lot, like 120 million naira a year, like 200 million a year, you will see something more sizable in terms of the increase. But overall, even if you earn 1 billion naira every month, you don't get to pay more than 25%, which is much lower than you find in almost every country around the world. Maybe very few countries you have lower rate than that, including even in Kenya, in Ghana, in South Africa, you pay a lot more. And of course, in developed countries, you pay more than 40 in some countries. So it's still quite decent. In addition to that, we also looked at so there's the income side, which is what I just explained, but there's also the consumption side. So what is it that people need to consume to meet their basic needs, the essentials? And that will be food, that will be education, that will be healthcare, that will be transportation, and that will be accommodation. These 5 items account for over 80% of household spending, where their income goes every single month. So on those items, the VAT have also been on food, on education and healthcare, the VAT has been removed, such that not only is there no VAT on those products and services, anyone producing those goods and services, should they have to pay VAT in the process of doing so, their VAT cost will be refunded to them. So that is significant. So which means the average Nigerian will see the relief from two angles. One, in terms of the income that they earn, and then in terms of where they spend their money. So that's significant. In addition to that, we have the relief for small businesses. It's not just the exemption from income tax.
Okay, looks like we have a bit of a glitch there from Mr. Oyedele. I do hope we can get him back on the call to conclude this conversation, but he was just explaining there, and I think these are the most talked about aspects of the new law, the exemption threshold for small businesses, what it does even to salary earners, and then, of course, the progressive nature of VATs, which, well, the rich may not be so happy about, but according to him, when you look at what's going on in other countries, 25% is still fair. And then those who earn less actually do have to pay less of or none of the tax. And of course, that's supposed to increase your disposable income at the end of the month, but as a salary earner, the small business and all of that. And, you know, we did talk about small businesses also being captured in the rebased GDP, you know, the small businesses covering about 42% of that. But I guess the other parts, which I haven't heard so much conversation, is that controversial VAT sharing formula. It reduces the federal government's VAT from 15 to 10%. I know you remember the drama with the governors around this, so I hope we can really get Mr. Oyedele to help us understand how this is going to work and the implication of it. Because we just had the FAC for June, about 1.8 trillion, that's like the highest. And conversation now is, yes, the sub-nationals, they are getting more money now, especially since subsidy had been removed. Yes. So what are we seeing as the impact of that? So now we're seeing that this new law is reducing the federal government's share of VAT from 15 to 10%, while increasing allocations of state and local government areas to 55 and 35%, respectively. And so this is supposed to put more resources in the hand of the state and the local governments. And then what? So we know that this is about tax and is about getting the revenue and sharing it and all of that. And then what can we expect from the local government, especially with the autonomy that they now have based on the law of the land? And then, of course, the states, the sub-nationals. You know, so these are some areas that I would really like to get the thoughts of Mr. Oyedele on. And I do hope that we could have him join us and help us talk about it. Of course, there's also, he's talked about the VAT on zero rate on essential goods and services. The NTA has expanded the list of zero rated to include goods, services, basic food, medicals, and pharmaceuticals. So everyday man, everyday Nigerian is supposed to feel the impact of this. I wonder if we have Mr. Oyedele back now. Hello, Mr. Oyedele,
Yes,
do we have you back?
Yes, yes.
What a loss of time, and we don't have a lot. And we don't have a lot
I
of
don't know
it.
what happened to the internet, so I had to switch again. So
okay, all right. So do you want to pick up your thoughts, or should I just ask you the next question? Because
no, I think you can ask me the next question.
Okay,
because
so
of time.
it's the VAT. I mean, the sharing formula. So we remember the drama that went with all of that. We're glad that is in the past now. We've seen a reduction in the allocation to the federal government, an increase in the states and the local government. And we're so glad the local government has autonomy now. What can we expect from this? Already FAC is really high now, 1.8 trillion for the month of June. What can we expect? What can Nigerians put their eyes on now that we have this new formula for sharing VAT?
Yeah, indeed. So one thing we can expect is states and local governments will earn more because the federal government is ceding 1/3 of their own VAT revenue will go to sub-national. Number two is that the basis for sharing VAT has been adjusted slightly. So the amount of VAT you get that is attributed to consumption in your state is now 30%. That was 20% before. We had wanted it to go as high as 60%, but of course, like you said, it became very controversial. And the governor said to us, that's what they want, and we have to respect that. But what is really fundamental is it's not just the increase from 20% to 30% in terms of consumption in your territory. It is the fact that how that data is derived will be done differently, which is actually based on consumption rather than where the VAT was remitted, which is what we're doing before. And I believe that once we're able to operate this new law for, say, about 1 year, by the end of 2026, the data will become crystal clear to everybody, including the governors, why that 30% needs to go up even further. Because at that time, it won't be speculation anymore, it will be data-driven. Other than the consumption 30%, the rest of it is equality is at 50%, and then population is at 20%.
So the other thing...
So I think what we also need to expect is, hold government more to account, so when they collect these taxes, so they spend it for us.
So I wish there was a way for, that holding to account, because in a country like Kenya, we've seen protests because of taxes, and even in Ghana and all of that. And we know that the tax is really concerned about the generation of that revenue and widening the tax net and all of that. But it will also help, just as the tax law is trying to put transparency in the collection part. If there was something to also put transparency in the spending part, because now we see, since the removal of subsidy, FAC has increased, but really, can we trace it? Can we trace the benefits of it?
Yeah, we just need to pay more attention, and paying more attention is essentially more for the middle class, because the poorest people are too preoccupied with what to eat and how to survive. They hardly can hold government to account, and many of them don't even know their rights, so they feel privileged that they even see a government official or that they have one, substandard road constructed in their community. So the middle class has to do a lot of the heavy lifting. And some of it is we already have in the new tax laws that allows citizens to even question government and even challenge government in court. So first is to demand for financial reporting. So like you mentioned, we have the local government autonomy. And as we speak today, not one of the 774 local government has any form of accounts or budget online. So that's not acceptable in 2025. So if we begin to demand these little things, you must prepare your budget, you must put it online, you must prepare your audited account, you must put it online. Whatever is demanded is supplied. It's just like principle of economics. If people are not demanding for those basic things, and then what they supply to them is go for a rally and sing and dance, and then share some t-shirts and bread, and they move on to the next election. So if we change our habits and our attitude, governance will get better, and we need to start doing that like yesterday.
So I remember one of the conversations I had with you, at the beginning of all of this and in the middle of it, one of your biggest pain was the issue of multiple taxation. You gave the number of taxes and all of that. What's the number now? How have you resolved that issue of multiple taxation? Noting, of course, this is at the national level, but you still have the states, you have the local government.
Yeah, that's a very important question, Ini. So tax harmonization is one of the most important deliverables from these reforms. You will recall that even Mr. President himself on day one, on his inauguration, called out this multiplicity of taxes as one of the areas he wants to address. So what we have done now is hard to tell you what the numbers are, because it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, and then the process has just started. There are 3 layers, or maybe even 4, to multiplicity of taxes in Nigeria. So there are taxes that are collected for the federation. There are taxes that are collected for the federal government. There are taxes that are collected for the states, and there are taxes that are collected for the local government. So like 4 levels. So what we have done are the ones where we have the powers through the laws of the National Assembly to harmonize, which is essentially federation taxes, and federally collected taxes. We could not have harmonized the taxes at the state level by passing a law at the National Assembly or the local government, because that would be in conflict with the Constitution. So what we have done is we have sent a proposed amendment to the Constitution to the National Assembly, months ago. They're now going around the country to have those engagements. And we are very hopeful that they will be able to amend the Constitution to address this multiplicity of taxes. That is when truly Nigerians will feel the real impact, because all taxes at all levels would then be harmonized to what we hope will be a single digit across all those levels.
Certainly looking forward to that. So it's supposed to start January 2026, but I believe that companies, especially the big companies, maybe they're supposed to be adjusting their papers, their workings, to be able to meet up with that. What are corporates supposed to be doing now in preparation for January 2026?
Yeah, actually, everybody has to do something. If I don't want to say they have to do a lot. So the low-income earners and the small businesses need to be aware. So we're going to be doing a lot of sensitization, education, public awareness. You're going to see a lot of that in the coming days and weeks, because if you make the best reforms and policies in the world, and the people who need to benefit are not aware, they'll still be taken advantage of by some officers who either themselves are not aware or are just corrupt. So we need to do that, a lot of education and awareness. For medium-sized and large businesses, they need to look at how these reforms would impact them in terms of benefits to them, in terms of compliance obligation. For example, you need to report when you enjoy certain incentive. You must prepare your report and submit to the tax authority. If you have your tax strategy, you want to know whether you are aggressively evading or avoiding taxes, you need to report that. You need to also prepare. Professionals need to prepare, because it's a new regime completely. A lot of the skills and the knowledge that people have for decades will not be as useful anymore. So they have to learn new things. There will be some investment in technology for many businesses, like the ones that allow you to do electronic invoicing. Some of it will be software. And of course, a lot of training, even for the media as well, for public analysts, for consulting firms, for professional bodies. We're going to be having all these engagements to let people understand their role. Even the government, what we have seen is we had the withholding tax regulation that took effect from January 1st, 2025. And more than 6 months after, many government agencies were still deducting the old rate. And the excuse is that nobody sent them a memo. So we said, okay, if it's a memo that you respect more than the law, we'll write the memo and send to you, so that everybody is ready on day one in 2026. We should all comply and do the right thing, whether you're in government, whether you're in the private sector, whether you're small or large. Let us just learn for once to do the right thing and see how all those things, piece together to form a whole that will make our country much better and a society we can be proud of.
Mr. Ayinde, did you see the states? I mean, you talked about, obviously, the states have to domesticate, and the States House of Assembly. Do you see them meeting up with this timeline of January 2026?
Yes. So the states are on board with us. We have the Joint Tax Board, where you have all the internal revenue services. We have spent a lot of time together. In fact, they also have set up now a retreat in another 1 or 2 weeks, where we're going to spend 2 days together going through all these details. Many of them are members of our committee. At any point in time, not less than 6 of them from the 6 geopolitical zone have been involved in the entire process. So they're actually ready, they're prepared. So wherever, is it that they need help or support, we're there to support them. And we also have a lot of partners who are supporting us as well, including even some foreign, tax authorities where, we have something to learn from their experience. We had some delegation come from France just last week to visit us. We've had some engagement with HMRC in the UK. We're also speaking to some of our peers in Africa, and they're sharing experiences and learning with us, because some of the things we have introduced for the first time in Nigeria, many of those things have been done in those countries for years. So they have learned a lot. They have made mistakes. We don't need to repeat their mistakes. We can just learn from them and then leapfrog from there. So that's the way we're going about it. We're very confident that states are on board with us, and they will be ready to implement the reforms.
And what difference does this, we just got a rebased GDP, we saw services very active, informal sector getting more light. What difference does it bring, on board of this, the new tax law?
Yeah, quite very useful. So the rebased GDP for the country gives more insights and more accurate data for policy formulation. For example, we now know that the agri sector is not growing enough. So the growth is, I think, 0.7%, less than 1%. If your population is growing at about 3%, and your agri is growing at less than 1%, then you can predict what that means for food security and even the prices of those foods. You also have a problem with moving food and other produce around, and the multiplicity of taxes you have to pay, and so on and so forth. We also know that services is a little bit bigger than we thought it was. So all the interventions we have introduced in the new tax laws, for example, services can now claim input credit for their assets and services. Before, we treated services as if it was something we are trying to discourage, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So what we've done now is to align the treatment of services as the same way as we should treat manufacturing, and then both manufacturing and services, we have enhanced their ability to reduce their costs and improve their margin and profitability. So those things will help us. On one hand as well, our tax to GDP ratio will fall because the size of the GDP has gone up, and your tax revenue will not go up overnight. It will take time. So there will be slight downward review to the tax to GDP ratio. We have just commenced the recalculation now. Because the GDP has been rebased, we have to rebase our tax to GDP ratio. But we are still quite optimistic that within the next 3 years, we'll be able to get to 18% of tax to GDP ratio at a minimum, which is one of our major deliverables in terms of KPIs from this reform. So debt to GDP ratio will drop, but our view is that government should not use that as a basis to borrow more. We should focus on what is sustainable. By the way, our committee also worked on National Fiscal Policy Framework that speaks to revenue mobilization, spending, and borrowing. So all of these are just tying together, and I think it's coming at the right time. So we have a good platform and basis for economic planning going forward.
So, we're actually out of time, but I cannot end without asking this question. The question of, well, FIRS is now Revenue Service, is going to be Nigeria Revenue Service from January, and the prospects of them being the sole collector of taxes. How is that going to work?
Actually, we should be saying, how have we managed to work all these years without doing that? So every country does the same thing. You go to South African Revenue Service, they collect all revenues. You go to HMRC, they collect all revenue, including Social Security. You go to France, they collect not just everything, they also process payment for everything and prepare account for everyone. So this harmonization is the way to go. It improves efficiency, it enhances transparency, and it allows both the taxpayer or the citizens and the government to know the health of their economy. When you have more than 60 agencies collecting taxes and levies, and you have no idea what they have collected and what they haven't collected and how they're spending it, it is hard to make progress that way. So this is one of the most exciting things we have been able to do. And I can't even wait for when we get to a point where more payments and more taxes and levies and almost everything, including when you pay your driver license, international passport, all of that should be harmonized into a single platform. Let everybody just focus on doing their work and not have to worry about collecting taxes or fees or levies or fines. That is what we should be aiming for.
Ms. Ayodele, it looks like you have a lot of work to do and you're going to be there for a long time, but we wish you the very best. And we're here to have these conversations. We're here to have these conversations with you. And once again, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
All right, now let's head to the global space. Will has a very short time today because we had Will. We had.
I'll make sure Donald Trump.
Have you heard that there's an exemption now?
No, please. There's no exemption for you. I'm sending it. And you know, one of the top of the conversations or the topics that is really burning is the EU. The EU is
the EU and the US now. We're out from China and US.
So the EU negotiates trade policy for 27 nations, and that's a huge responsibility. About 450 million people in that region, in that bloc, and so they have a responsibility, and they feel they cannot be strong-armed into any bad agreement with Trump. So let's just have that conversation with Adrian Terzic today. So the European Union, as I mentioned, is exploring a broader set of possible countermeasures against the United States as prospects for an acceptable trade agreement with Washington is fading, and that's according to EU diplomats, with a hard line on tariffs from Washington. And the European Central Bank is meeting this week. Tensions are rising across both sides of the Atlantic. Today we're joined by Adrian Terzic, a senior country risk analyst for Europe at Fitch Solutions. He's going to unpack what's brewing this trade showdown and what it means for the EU economies and markets. Good morning, Terzic. It's good to have you on the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So tariff pressure, let's just talk about that. It's a tariff alert. Trump is threatening 30% duties on EU imports from August the 1st. How are Brussels and EU leaders diplomatically managing the ticking clock here?
So there's been I think that everyone is working very hard to get to a deal by August 1st. We've had signs from both sides that things are getting better. Howard Lutnick, the US Commerce Secretary, this week has sort of expressed optimism that a deal is around the corner. But when we look on the EU side, EU's trade chief, Maroš Šefčovič, has really struggled to find a breakthrough in what they want to see in terms of a 0-for-0 tariff deal. And so they were offered all sorts of things from buying more US energy goods, oil and gas, or buying US semiconductors. But what really appears to be the sticking point is the EU's VAT and digital regulations.
Your thought there. We just want to sign on very quickly. Ini, over to you.
Yeah, so we have an event going on. That's for our DSTV viewers. The Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority. They have an event, West African Refined Fuel Market, Pathway to Regional Reference Market. And that's happening in Abuja. That's for our DSTV viewers. For our other viewers, you're still here on Business Morning. Will.
Thank you so much, Ini. So, Terzic, could you just go on with what you were saying? Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, of course. So, yeah, the VAT and digital regulations are a big thing. And so I think that's where the EU is going to struggle to find a compromise with the US. And so I think in the recent weeks, the US, both sides have been starting to realize that things are getting tight and are becoming a lot more difficult. And so we've seen signs that EU officials are starting to prepare for maybe some sort of contingency measures or things that could go if there is no deal by August the 1st.
Definitely, we did what you just mentioned, and the EU is prepping retaliatory tariffs up to, say, 72 billion euros, and we see that new anti-coercion instrument they're talking about. But how serious are they about using it?
So I do think the EU is going to have to be very careful with introducing any significant retaliations, such as the anti-coercion instrument. We don't really have that much news on what exactly it is and where it's going to be targeting. But I think that if they do introduce it, it's something I would be very worried about. And so I think the reasons they're going to be very careful is it's not least just because it's the last thing they want to do is start a tit-for-tat escalation in tariffs with the US. We saw that with them in China this year. Tariffs went up to over 100% on both sides, and that would really grind things to a halt for the European economy. And I think that a big challenge the Europe has been facing has been these high cost pressures, which the domestic industry really has struggled to bring down since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And so adding on top of this, this additional retaliatory tariff, I think the European economy is really going to struggle to find a foothold because ultimately it's the consumer that pays the tax burden in the end when it comes to tariffs.
We do know that about 1/5 of European goods exports heads to the US, and we're seeing that dollar to euro, the dollar weakening against the euro, and the dollar is really euro is under pressure still. Is the ECB looking at their meeting today, assessing what's likely going to come out of that? Are they likely to hold fire on interest rates? Are they likely to put a hold or cut rates? What do you think?
So I do think that they will hold off this week. You're right, the euro has been somewhat rocky in recent weeks because of the trade talks, but I think that it's important to note the euro is still over 10% up on the dollar in the year. So broadly, when we take things and look at the bigger picture, I think on the currency side, the euro is in a position which is more favorable in the argument for more interest rate cuts by the ECB because just how it reduces the cost for imported goods. But for me, the main reason why the ECB will hold off is just because of how high the uncertainty is around the trade negotiations that are happening in the current week and the next week, and just sort of how big the stakes are for the Eurozone economy with how these negotiations go. So I think that, go ahead.
No, just go ahead. Just finish your thought.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, a lot is going to be decided by the deal struck between Washington and Brussels. And so the ECB really is going to wait and see until we have a clear idea of where we are going to go with tariffs before they make any sort of move, in my opinion.
Just quick one, in terms of forward guidance, if this 30% tariff, according to analysts, come into effect, what kind of knock-on effect will it have? How might it influence the ECB's forward guidance for, say, the growth in the EU zone?
A 30% tariff would be very much the worst case for the ECB. They released some scenarios in the previous meetings, with their base case being a very similar situation to how we have now. And so 30% would be a very big shift in what they're looking at for the economy and for where they will likely guide interest rates to be. And so I think that overall, another 30% is going to shave off about maybe another 0.7 percentage points off of Eurozone growth over the next 18 months. And that is a big deal when it comes to demand side inflationary pressures and what the ECB is looking at. And so I think the ECB's forward guidance in this meeting is going to be very cautious because they're going to be keeping an eye on how the trade talks go, but they're not really going to commit to anything concrete until we have a better idea of how the economic outlook is going to look going forward, with much of that being decided after August the 1st. Definitely,
we'll keep an eye on that and know that you at Fitch Solutions will also be watching. Thank you so much, Adrian Terzic, Senior Country Risk Analyst for Europe at Fitch Solutions. Thank you for joining us on Business Morning. So, Ini, that's what we have for today. Yeah, hopefully, EU reaches the deal soon.
All right, and that's it on the program. Thank you so much for being a part of it. We'll be back today, NPC, 1 p.m. You want to join us then? I'm Ini John McCall. Talk to you later.